Hi, everyone, and welcome to the first content module in Journalism 101, Critical Analysis of the Mass Media here at UNLV. This is the online version, and I am your instructor, Dr. Paul J. Trout. As is typical of a lot of introductory chapters in survey courses, introductory courses, this particular chapter is designed to introduce you to some of the basic constructs and theories that will help you frame your approach and your understanding of individual areas of the media as we move forward into those chapters in the coming weeks. So let's move forward and look at what some of the learning objectives are in this little 15-minute or so lectet. And as you know, I like to have you watch these before you actually read any chapter content to help you with your understanding of that content. So here are some of the learning objectives and some of the things that you're going to learn in this chapter. The first thing you're going to be introduced to is the notion of convergence. And we've been talking about convergence in the field of media studies for a number of decades now. Initially, we talked about how convergence was beginning to happen, and how convergence was going to change things. And now, of course, decades later, we have seen how convergence has changed in great ways the media industries and the entire notion of content, provider, producer, channel, and audience in very different ways compared to even the recent past. Convergence, of course, means the coming together of things. And probably the most important aspect of convergence in the last, well, actually 50 or 60 years has been the transformation of information, recorded material, text, the ways that we save content, the ways that we replicate and duplicate content, the way that we generate content. We have moved from an analog society, an analog information society that really characterized communications industries for over 100 years, to a digital society. And I know many of you have heard about this concept, but here you'll learn more about what that actually means. And what convergence and digital convergence actually means is that now all information is susceptible to the same encoding process, a series of ones and zeros in multiple and infinite combinations. And as a result of that common base of information and information exchange, it opens up all kinds of avenues in terms of common and shared file systems. So in this chapter, you're going to read about digital convergence. You're going to read about the main types of convergence and their implications for communication. I've been talking a little bit about technological convergence, the whole notion of digitization, and how that has transformed the way we think about media content. There has also been convergence in terms of the economics of information, not just media industries, but information broadly conceived in terms of financial institutions, economies, localized and global economies. There are increasingly shared databases in terms of information that's accessible on a wide scale. This gets into all kinds of interesting areas. We now have areas like cybercrime, cyber espionage, all kinds of things that are a function of a platform that is digitized. There's also cultural convergence, and this is a fascinating area for those of us who study media audiences, in that on an increasing basis, larger and larger groups of individuals or groups of people have access to the same common form of information. It's the whole notion of a young African student in a high school in Uganda who is wearing Los Angeles Lakers ball caps and listening to American music. And there are theoretical interests attached to the idea that With cultural convergence, there may be the loss of uniqueness and individuality in terms of cultural and ethnic groups. So you'll get exposure to some of these concepts, and some of these ideas will be revisited as we move forward in additional chapters. Um, I try to make this course as practical as possible. I know that many of you are interested in pursuing or considering pursuing fields in the various communications industries. And so in this chapter, you will be exposed to 8 major changes that are taking place in communication today because of some aspect of technological, economic, or cultural convergence. And so you're going to see what the implications are in terms of the types of organizations that may be your future or potential employers in terms of media industries and how that will impact your profession. For example, our curriculum here at the Hank Greenspun School of Journalism and Media Studies is a multi-platform technology curriculum in that we are training, for example, in our journalism sequences, individuals who are not only good writers, but who can also shoot a little video, who can also take good photographs, who can also generate imagery suitable for an online environment or a web page, and who can update that information regularly as part of the overall changes that are occurring in journalism, where one no longer writes for an afternoon deadline for a paper, but is constantly uploading information, and that information has both visual and text and motion video formats. So the professions are affected by communications. Professions are affected as well by this whole notion of convergence, and each and every one of us can look at just our media behavior in the last 4 or 5 years and recognize that how we do things now is changing from how we used to do things 2 or 3 years ago. Few of us ever sit down now and watch a television show when it airs on a network station at a particular day and time. We may save that program to a digital video recorder. We may stream that video by means of any one of publicly accessible or commercially available websites. So audiences and the whole notion of audience is changing as well. And how we measure audience behavior is important as well with this changing convergence landscape. One of the greatest challenges in terms of the industry is how do we make money doing what we do, given that audiences are changing so radically in terms of how they do media. We can no longer rely exclusively on readership surveys, assessments, ratings, traditional measures of audience that translated into ways that we structured advertising rates. Because our audiences are sometimes so elusive and difficult to measure, given the multiplicity and the multi-channel ways in which you and I can access, text or video content. Additional learning objectives. You need to be exposed to some of the theories of communication. I'm going to bring up the next line as well. So in parts of this chapter, you'll be exposed to basic theories of mass communication. And one of the things that you're going to learn is that there are no uniquely, simply just models or theories of communication. That we now know something that many of us have been arguing for 50 or so years, and that's that all communication is mediated. Some of it is interpersonally mediated, some of it is mass mediated, some of it is emerging media mediated. My own particular research interests examine the ways that you and I utilize our favorite media in order to fuel other areas of communication, like our interpersonal relationships, like our relationships in social media, where we talk about favorite television shows or favorite television characters, or where we may incorporate certain aspects of television characters or favorite newscasters or whatever, in terms of the ways that we project our own images and our own self-concept or notions of self-concept to others. So this is very intermingled, this idea of mass communication and interpersonal communication. And hence some people talk about mediated, meaning mass or new media mediated interpersonal communication. So you'll be exposed as part of this chapter as well to the basic components and functions of the mass communication process, some of the traditional models that have been used to characterize this process. And you'll be exposed to some of the functions of media and the purposes that they have served in society over time. They allow us to surveil our environment. My wife is a real, if you will, news hound. She has the radio on constantly to news channels. My wife is keenly intent on staying abreast of events during the day. She goes to bed with a portable radio under her chin just to listen to late night talk shows. She does that in part also to be entertained. So my wife is in some ways a throwback to earlier generations in that she uses radio almost radio and movies much more than, say, I do in terms of television for information about what's going on in her world. She uses the media primarily to surveil the world. I use media primarily to escape or to be entertained after a long day of work. So these are many of the concepts that you'll be exposed to in this chapter, and I hope you enjoy reading this chapter, and I look forward to joining you once again when we turn to the second week in the semester and chapter 2.